What's up, everyone? In this video, we are looking at the Week 11 NFL First Look. So, wasn't able to make a video like this for last week. Wanted to make sure I get one out for this week. So, let's get into it. As always, appreciate if you guys hit the like button on the video, subscribe if you haven't already. Follow me on Twitter. It's at the DFS Process. Week 10 was kind of ugly. I mean, I know some people had some success. If you faded Mike Davis, if you faded some of the chalk plays, which busted, and first couple hours were just super painful football to watch. It got better with the only game that really went off was a Cardinals and Bills game if you stack that up. But looking ahead to week 11, we have a lot more games that have closer totals, have a lot of games that we can potentially stack up. So let's get into it. So not sure if I said this or not, but as always, appreciate if you guys hit the like button on the video before we get into it. Let's see if we can get 100 plus likes. So we'll look at the Vegas totals before we get into it. The Steelers, no team right now has a 30-point total. The Steelers have the highest total on the slate facing off against Jacksonville at 29 and a quarter. I think they look really good this week. The Saints, even with Jameis Winston, have a 28-point total, which is pretty surprising, but there's not that many teams in great spots this week. You have the Vikings in a good spot. The Ravens have a good spot, but their offense has been a little bit struggling, although they still happen to put up some points. But last week it was the weather, but their offense is always tough to figure out who you want to stack Lamar Jackson with. The Chargers are in a good spot against the Jets, and then you kind of get the Patriots. I think are in a good spot against Houston. You could go back to the well with Houston and stack that game up, even though they only have a 22 and a 22.75 total, but that's because maybe if Gilmore misses his fourth straight game, they would be a little bit better. And the weather hopefully is looking a lot better for them this week than it was last week. So you got some teams to stack up. I think the Steelers are the top stack of the week right now. Some things might change, but their offense is just looking really good. Ben Roethlisberger is playing his best football of the season right now. He's thrown 7 touchdowns the last 2 games. 22-4 touchdown interception ratio looked really good. Even in a 26-point win, they ended up throwing the football 46 times. He threw 4 touchdowns, so it's not like this team is letting up when they get up by big points, which definitely could happen this week against Jacksonville. So I feel good about going with Ben Roethlisberger and that Steelers offense this week. Their wide receivers are all super cheap. But looking at the quarterback position to start, you got Lamar Jackson. No quarterback this week is about 8,000. You got Lamar Jackson at 73, so you got quarterback's priced down a bit this week. He just hasn't been the same guy this year. He's still been getting the rushing numbers, but the passing is only 14 touchdowns, not throwing for as much yardage. You see a lot of games where he's thrown for under 200 yards this season, which really didn't happen at all, or very infrequent last season. So I think I'll pass on him this week because I like a couple quarterbacks that are a bit cheaper. Rodgers looks fine, but it's a tough spot, so I'm not going there. I think Herbert is now priced up, even though it's a really good spot. I think there's some other guys that you can go instead of Herbert, like a Big Ben at 67 in a great spot. They have the highest total. Just been playing great football in 2 good matchups that he's had recently. He's gotten you 32 and 28 fantasy points. Now it's a very similar spot against Jacksonville. I think he is in consideration this week as one of the good spend-ups at quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater, see if he happens to. He seems like there's a chance he could practice, so I think he will end up playing on Sunday, but keep an eye on that. Breeze is already ruled out. He's going to miss probably multiple weeks with collapsed lung and some real damage to his ribs, so hopefully he heals well and they gets back in time for the playoffs and all that good stuff for the Saints, but can't be playing Breeze this week. You got Jameis Winston, I think people will go to at 59. It's always scary playing Jameis Winston. But if you want to play him, I guess, nothing's stopping you. It's a really good spot against Atlanta. I probably will not go there, though, because I think you can easily get up to some better quarterbacks that have more upside, like a Cam Newton against Houston in a dome. Really good spot for him. The price tag on him has been down the last few weeks, but he's been playing good football ever since coming out of that 33-6 beating. He's been playing good football against some tougher matchups like Baltimore and Buffalo. His rushing touchdowns are always there every week. He always has a chance to get you one or multiple rushing touchdowns. The passing touchdowns are not really there, but they can come And this week against Houston, it's a really good spot for him. One of the better spots that he's had this season. He's had some tough matchups this year, so I think it's a good spot for him to continue trending upwards and maybe have a repeat of his first couple weeks where he put up like 26 and 38 fantasy points. So definitely think Cam Newton is one of the stronger quarterbacks options this week. So right now, the few guys that I'm considering are Ben Roethlisberger at 67. I like Cam Newton at 62. I think you can go with Tua if you want another cheap quarterback at 58, and then Joe Burrow against Washington is only 55. Coming off of coming off of a tough game, it was pretty unfavorable conditions with the wind and just a really tough Pittsburgh defense. They can get to the quarterback, so I think he's in a bounce back spot. It's a Washington defense that has been solid on paper, but we saw Matthew Stafford carve them up a little bit last week. So I think Burrow at 55 is worth a shot in tournaments. And then if you want to go completely dumpster diving, you maybe could look at Alex Smith in a good spot against Cincinnati. But I think I'll stay with the two guys that I'm really looking at are Cam Newton and Ben Roethlisberger. I think you can make an argument for both. Right now, I have Ben Roethlisberger in the first look just because he fits with what I'm trying to do. At running backs this week, you got Kamara at 92 and Cook. Kamara had 2 rushing touchdowns, although he had just 15 yards on the ground. So I think they're going to utilize him more on the ground with Winston as a quarterback, but it's a good spot for him. You can play him if you want. I think him and Cook both are pretty similar this week. I like Cook a little bit better just because his touches are, he's getting 30 plus touches a week now, like 34 last night against Chicago. Got it going late in the fourth, struggled to get anything going on the ground for the first 3 quarters, but got some things going in the fourth, so you could play him at 9K. I think he looks good in one of the best spots you can get as a running back going against this Dallas defense. They're 31st against the rush. You've seen them give up huge games to multiple running backs already this season, so Cook is probably my favorite running back of the slate, so I'm definitely going to be prioritizing Dalvin Cook. He's just face of that offense right now, him and Thielen, I guess, just because he can get into the end zone. But definitely it's the Dalvin Cook show, and I think it will be this week at home. And then we got some other top running backs in tough spots, like Henry in a tougher spot against Baltimore. You have Jones in a tough spot. So I definitely will go to the other 2 in great spots in Kamara and Cook. You have Chubb against the Eagles. Now that him and Kareem Hunt both kind of are going to be splitting some work, I'm not that interested, especially with the Eagles' rush defense is solid, so I'm not going to be going there. Miles Sanders had a really good game on the ground. It's just Doug Peterson doesn't want to give him the ball in the red zone. They had 2 rushing touchdowns. They came from Boston Scott, who went for like 50 plus yards, and then Corey Clement got one, even though Miles Sanders set them up inside the 15 or inside the 10, and he kind of got a rushing touchdown. So there's always some risk because Doug Peterson doesn't trust him completely, but I think you can definitely make a strong case to play Miles Sanders if you want at 6,900. Mike Davis broke everybody's heart. Probably will get another start this week with McCaffrey looking uncertain, but now that he's 6,800, you definitely do not have to play him, and I think you can look to other guys. James Conner has really struggled recently. They really just kind of moved away from the ground, like 13 carries, 9 carries for him the last 2 weeks. They were even in favorable matchups, so I'm not sure what really happened there. They are more than comfortable with letting Ben Roethlisberger throw 40, 50 times a game, so I think you can maybe hope for a bounce back spot for Conner and a good spot against Jacksonville, but he's had some good spots recently and just hasn't been able to produce. So I'd rather go to a guy that I think is trending upwards in like a DeAndre Swift. Last week he had his best week of the season. He got the start, so before they were starting Adrian Peterson, and Swift was kind of the second guy. But last week they really prioritized getting him the football. He got 20 plus touches, which I think will be a trend going forward. It's a good spot against Carolina on the ground, so I think you can really feel confident with DeAndre Swift, especially looking at the other running backs last week and seeing that Peterson just got 4 carries on the ground and Kerryon Johnson just got 1 carry. So it's really looking like the DeAndre Swift show now in Detroit, and Matthew Stafford is dealing with a thumb injury. So maybe they'll have to rely on the running game a bit more, but I think Swift looks really good this week. Other running backs to consider besides DeAndre Swift, maybe Joe Mixon if he returns would be a strong play. Below 6,000, Jonathan Taylor, his role has just kind of decreased every single week, so it's tough to trust him. Gibson, I like him against Cincinnati. The Redskins don't really have strong play at wide receiver besides Terry McLaurin, so they're really relying on Gibson, and then McKissick has been a big factor the last few weeks. You can play either one of them. You have Balaj, not that interesting at 56. You have Duke Johnson, although it's a tough spot against the Patriots defense, so I'm not that interested. Then it just kind of right now there's not that much value at running back. I'm sure if something happens, something happens this week in practice, or some of these guys happen to miss, then you can look at some value. But right now I'm just not seeing it. So I'm rolling with Dalvin Cook and DeAndre Swift as my running backs this week. Wide receiver, you have Devontae Adams in a tough spot against the Colts. You have Julio potentially getting Ridley back, so more competition for targets there. You have Keenan Allen now priced at 74, so there's not that many spend ups at wide receiver this week. You have a lot of great plays in the 6K range. I think it starts with Terry McLaurin at 6,900. Now that Alex Smith is the quarterback, they've seen him just be more consistent. 9, 8, 11, 12 targets for him. The last few weeks, he's gotten you 3 touchdowns receiving, but he's gotten you a lot of 90-plus yard games. I think he looks strong this week. You have Thielen at just 6,300 against Dallas. Now, I know this could be a spot where they just run the football with Dalvin Cook, but that price tag on Thielen looked really good. He's been a 7K plus wide receiver for most of the season, so we're getting him at 6,300. Looks pretty good to me. And then the Pittsburgh wide receivers, all 3 of them look fine and look really good. If you want to look at the snap counts, they all play pretty similar amounts. Week 9, you had Claypool play 81%, Juju played 91%, and Johnson play 86%. They've kind of moved away from James Washington now. So I think all 3 of Claypool, Smith, and Deontay Johnson are in play because they're all super affordable, and week 8 they all play the same amount. Personally, I like Claypool a lot just because he gives you that touchdown upside. He's gotten 10, 13, and 9 targets. It's a tremendous spot for him to pile on the touchdowns or get a couple more this week against Jacksonville. They should pile up the points. And the second guy I like is Deontay Johnson just because he has been one of Ben Roethlisberger's favorite targets week in and week out that he's been healthy. You've seen like 10, 13, 15, 10, 11 targets for him. Really consistent. I think he looks strong as well. And then Juju's that third guy just because some weeks he just doesn't have it, but recently he's been getting the targets. But I still think he's behind, personally he's behind Claypool for me just because I think Claypool is going to have a really big week this week. He had 2 touchdowns last week, only caught 10. Well, he got 10 targets, but only caught 4 of them. They sometimes like to give him carries on the ground as well. That's kind of went down the last few weeks, but he's just a really high upside player, and that's what I'm looking for. So Claypool, I think, looks really good this week to pair with Ben Roethlisberger. You could even double stack if you want. Other guys in that range that look appealing besides Thielen are like Will Fuller. If Stephon Gilmore happens to miss another week, I think you could definitely go with Will Fuller, who has been pretty consistent this year. Just a bad weather game for him last week. Only got 38 yards, but the wind was bad. They couldn't really throw the football deep, which is what Will Fuller likes to do. So I like Will Fuller in that range. I think you can definitely consider maybe T. Higgins has kind of emerged in Cincinnati. He's been really good for them and that offense, and Burrow likes to throw him the football. So maybe you could look at T. Higgins. Or you could definitely look at if Galladay happens to return, you got Galladay at just 5,800. There's a chance he happens to be back maybe this week. If that happens, then 5,800 for him for a guy that has been Matthew Stafford's favorite target. It's a good spot for him. He's pretty safe to get you like teens to 20 fantasy points. I think he would look pretty strong. And then you have Marvin Jones. If Galladay does not happen to return at 55, I think he looks fine. One guy that I'm liking quite a bit is Jacoby Myers. It's a really good spot for the Patriots offense to continue to play well. They've put up 23 and 30 points the last 2 weeks in some tough matchups. They put up 21 against Buffalo, even they could have had that touchdown late, but Cam Newton fumbled the football. But Myers is $4,900. He has just been the guy Cam Newton has locked into. Earlier in the season, he just hasn't been playing a lot, but now they just can't take him off the field. Like week 8, he played 98%. Week 9, he played a bunch too. With ever since Edelman's been on IR, played 99%. Week 9, week 10, he played like all the snaps too. It hasn't been loaded on that website yet, but Jakobi Meyers 4,900. They just have been getting him involved. The return of N'Keal Harry did absolutely nothing for him, as Harry didn't even have a catch or had one catch at just 2 targets. Oh no, he didn't have any catches last week. Didn't have any targets. So it's really Jakobi Meyers has emerged for them, and I think 4,900 for him against Houston. Definitely one of my favorite cheap receivers this week. You have quite a bit of guys that you can also look at below 5,000. I think it starts with Jakobi Meyers. Other guys to consider potentially are like Jalen Reagor at 4,300. You have Brashard Perriman. I think you can play. I just got word that Joe Flacco is going to start for the Jets this week again, and Flacco and Perriman had some good chemistry last week. Perriman played all the snaps at wide receiver. They couldn't take him off the field as well. So now that Perriman is healthy, now that you have Denzel Mims back, I think Crowder's production will definitely come down just because there's more bodies, but he was just really strong for them last week and played 98% of the snaps, just missed one snap. So Perriman, he could play at 4,300. I think he looks fine as a value play of Jalen Reagor in a favorable matchup against Cleveland. They're starting to get some more targets now that he's back and healthy. And then below $4,000, you have some ugly guys. You have maybe AJ Green. It just hasn't been consistent at all this season, but for tournaments, you can consider him. You have Randall Cobb, just as a punt play, but nothing that gets exciting. Could get excited about Denzel Mims at 3,300 just because he's playing a bunch. He played 96% of the snaps in Week 9 against the Patriots. You could see Flacco look to him more, and he's only 3,300, so super cheap. And then there's nobody else that I would consider. So wide receivers right now, I like Claypool, Myers, and then like Fuller right now I think is in play. You could look at Galladay if he happens to return, or Thielen. But if Gilmore happens to make his return this week, then I would probably get off of Fuller just because there's a probably good chance that Fuller will be matched up against Gilmore. All right, moving on to tight ends this week. You have no tight end above 5,000. You have Mark Andrews at 4,900. His role in that offense will definitely increase now that Nick Boyle is out for the season. It's not just like Boyle was taking a lot of targets, but he was taking a lot of snaps, and Andrews going to have to, probably get some. I think he'll just have to play a bigger role as a tight end and be on the field a lot more than he was. So 49 for him against Tennessee, I think looks fine. Jonnu Smith is 47. I don't think I'm that interested. He can get you a good game, but he can also get you two targets for like 20 yards. Definitely don't want to pay 4,700 for that kind of uncertainty. Hunter Henry finally got into the end zone last week. It's been a while for him, but he's still getting good targets. He has a good quarterback. 6, 7 targets a week you can kind of count on. I think he looks like a fine, reasonable tight end to pay up for. And then you have maybe Noah Fant, maybe Gesicki at 43. Definitely Hawkinson if they're dealing with some injuries at wide receiver. I think he looks fine. Below 4K, you have quite a bit of guys that you can consider. I think it starts with Austin Hooper against the Eagles in a favorable matchup. Just a bad game. Baker Mayfield didn't throw for a lot of yards because he doesn't do that a lot, and because of the weather. So could look to Hooper in a bounce back week. Could look to Goddard against the Cleveland. Also a good spot for him, and Ertz is still on IR. Had no catches at halftime, and they got it going in the second half of it. He's definitely going to be a bigger factor going forward for them. I think you definitely can look at Dalton Schultz at 36. Nobody's going to really go there, but he's just been playing a lot as a tight end. He's not like just a blocking tight end like a lot of guys are. He does run routes, and he can get you 7+ targets, so that looks fine to me at that price point. And then you have Logan Thomas, who was very popular earlier this season. People stopped playing him, but he's quietly been putting up a show and being a reasonable tight end recently. Ever since Alex Smith has taken over, he's been looking towards Thomas, and it kind of makes sense as Smith did throw to his tight ends a lot back when he was with the Chiefs. So I think he looks fine at 3,300. It's a great spot against Cincinnati. Um, I think he's probably my favorite value tight end. And then maybe you could look at Tanyan, just because has some upside. He is one of the best quarterbacks throwing the football too. But there's a lot of competition now, that especially if Lazard comes back. And then it kind of dies off. There's nobody else that I'm really looking at. So I really like going probably below 4K this week at tight end for like a Thomas or a Schultz or a Goddard or a Hooper. And then defenses this week, we got some value defenses like, well, always have to kind of take a shot at some defenses. None of them below 2,400. I guess you could maybe look at the Broncos, or maybe look at the Falcons because Winston can throw a lot of interceptions. So maybe the Falcons are the cheapest I'd go. 3K defenses you have are the Eagles, I think, are okay, and then you have the Redskins are okay as well. And then the pay up spots this week, I think you have the Dolphins. They've just been piling up the points defensively at 3,400. You have the Vikings at 33. Those are two defenses that I consider, and then the Steelers if you have a lot of salary left over. So that's it for me for the DraftKings side. FanDuel's very similar. I'll just kind of give you guys some sort of core over there that I have right now. Okay, FanDuel starting off at quarterback, you have Rodgers at 9K. Just not that interested with the matchup. Then it drops off $500 to Herbert. Then you have Lamar Jackson at 84. Big Ben is 8K, so I still like Ben Roethlisberger. I still think you can. Burrow is way more expensive, so I'm not that interested in him. I love Cam Newton at 76 for FanDuel. Winston at 72, you could maybe go there if you need a cheap guy, but let's see. You have Tua still unbelievably cheap at 67. FanDuel's a little bit easier to pay up. I think I still like Ben Roethlisberger this week. Well, as of now. Running backs, you're definitely gonna get Dalvin Cook in there at 10.5. Kamara is 97. He's a little bit cheaper, which is different than on DraftKings. So maybe you could play both if you wanted to really get creative and go cheap at quarterback or cheap at your receivers. But gonna plug in Dalvin Cook, and then Swift is 6,900. So I like to kind of build similar lineups just so I have the same players to root for. And I think that kind of makes sense with the pricing. There's no other running back that I think jumps off the page. I think Swift, with his involvement in the snap counts that he got last week, it was just a big jump that he's been getting. And I think that's definitely going to continue going forward because he definitely impressed last week. Wide receivers, I'm not going to have Devontae Adams this week. I'm probably not going to go that expensive because I am paying up a bit at running back and paying up at quarterback. So won't be able to fit in all the expensive receivers. But definitely looking to pair Ben Roethlisberger with somebody at least. You have Juju is 65, Claypool is 64, and Deontay Johnson is 64. Go play two of those guys because probably two of them are going to have good games. Maybe all three will have at least decent games, but Claypool at least is a guy that I have a lot of interest in. And Jacoby Myers is 6,000 on FanDuel, so you could play Brandon Cooks, you could play Jacoby Myers, you could play Jarvis Landry. All three are pretty viable. You have Jerry Jeudy, Perriman, maybe at 57. So that's some ways to go. I think I'll probably continue rolling with like Jacoby Myers just because it's a great matchup. You can't take him off the field. Been playing 99, 100% of snaps last few weeks. And Cam Newton has locked into him. Like a couple years ago back in Carolina, he locked into he would just lock into his tight end and Greg Olsen. He locked into wide receivers like Devin Funchess and just kind of keep throwing them the ball. And it's kind of been Jacoby Myers for him this year, at least the last few weeks. And that should continue because he's been really productive. So I like these five a lot on FanDuel. Look at tight end. Mark Andrews, 65. See if I can get there. I like Dallas Goedert, 58. You have Henry at just 55. Thomas is 52. So, maybe look at Austin Hooper or Logan Thomas. Or maybe go up for Henry. Tight end's not that different than on DraftKings. Pricing is pretty similar. Will Fuller is 71 and McLaurin is 73. Maybe go McLaurin instead, and you have 4,900 left. Defenses, go a bit cheaper at defense if you need to. On Fanduel, you have 3K as a minimum. Min price defense, I'm not interested in the Cowboys defense or the Jets defense. Potentially the Falcons just because they have Jameis Winston and he throws a lot of picks. Potentially the Panthers if something happens with Stafford this week and he ends up missing. And then I guess probably the defense I feel most safe with is like the Eagles defense, I think at 4K, or the Redskins defense at 41. But this week at defense, there's not that many that jump off the page. I think a lot of them are similar, so probably go cheap and see what it takes me. But that's it for the video. It's been a long one. Hopefully, you guys got something out of it. Thank you for watching, and best of luck this week.